Welcome, welcome. Thank you all for being here. My name is Sarah Bradley, and I'm part of the Nuns and Nuns Land Justice team. We're so excited to be here with our friends again, the Center for Ethical Land Transition. And yeah, many of you might be somewhat new to the work of Nuns and Nuns Land Justice. Some of you might be old friends. Some of you might have come to our event on the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery. However you find yourselves here, welcome. Thank you. Just a quick note, if you are new, the Nuns and Nuns Land Justice Project is an organization that is committed to supporting religious communities to incorporate land justice into their property planning processes. So we're here to create land transitions and property planning options that are rooted in ecological and racial healing. And our friends at CELT are really good allies and friends of us in that journey. And they're members of our faculty that is supporting our focus communities with technical support. And they're here to host an event that actually is a little bit of a reprise of a previous event that we hosted last fall, a 3-part training on cultural sensitivity for land transition processes. And this is kind of a new and improved version. And so we're excited that you're here. And if this is a refresher, it's probably a good thing because there is going to be a lot of deep and dense information in this training, but with this extended version, hopefully more time to really incorporate, understand, reflect, and riff together. So with that, I will hand it over to our lovely guest teachers here, our faculty members. Cassandra, I think you will be the first, or will it be Jason?
It's me.
Okay, go ahead, Jason.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here and excited to be back for those of you who have seen us before, met us before. And so we are going to jump in. We're going to be together for quite a while today because we have a 3-hour session. And fortunately, that means we'll have more time for group processing and reflecting on the content that gets presented. And we'll have more time for sharing out to our full list of people in this big room that we're sharing together. So I'm going to share my screen so we can see the presentation. All right. So I do hope that people have the printed worksheets that got emailed to you, the Genuine Offers and Ethical Land Transitions rubric, and also the threshold moments. If you don't have those, it's not a big deal. We will be sending out links to them when we enter our breakout rooms, but they're pretty important documents for the material that we're going to cover today. Also, always recommend that you have a pen or pencil and paper. I have mine with me, so I always take notes even when I'm a presenter. And want to make sure that you have what you need to be comfortable right now, like water or a cup of tea. We will be having a break that is about halfway through our session. So yeah. And today, Cassandra and I will be presenting. We're also joined by our other CELT staff member, Abby, who's in the background helping us with lots of little details and things. So if you haven't met us before, we're excited for you to meet us today. And we're gonna pop off of screen share so we can look at each other in this room again, and want to hand over to Cass, who's gonna share an opening prayer with us to bring us into this session. And there it is.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's such a joy to get to be learning together, to get to come back time and again with folks who keep joining us. And thank you for being here. And thanks to those who this is your first time joining us in a learning journey. So we're practitioners right at the edge right now of a lot of really beautiful land transitions that are happening in a reparative and justice-oriented context. And so it's our honor to share some of what we're learning, and again, to just be in it with you, because this is the work of our times, as we know, is unprecedented. The repair, the cultural repair that is needed, and the way that land and culture are reweaving themselves back together in these times. So I am going to share a prayer from my heart to help ground us, and just really invite each of you in all the places that you are to take a deep breath and land ever more presently in the seat that you're sitting in. Really honoring yourself, each of us, for the choice that we have made to spend 3 hours together in a Zoom space, learning about land and healing and repair together. So thanking each of us for what it took to be here, and just really just dropping in another breath collectively. Let's just take one more together. We'll take as many breaths as we need to just keep being even more present and alive as we walk this path together. And this morning, I really want to call in the land and the waters where each of us are. Everyone, whether you're listening to this recording at some future time, or you're here right now with us, and all of our land places that we sit, that we have a deepening stewardship relationship with, that we find spirit in, the many ways that spirit speaks to us in the languages of the waters and the wind and the animals, and the bountiful breath of springtime that surging in so many of the places that we are. We just attune to the energy of the earth, and allow ourselves to feel the deepening connection and healing and repair of our relationships, each of us, with earth and spirit as we know spirit. So just inviting that connection to be present, that we need the presence of spirit and earth in this deep work that we're doing, this courageous work that we do to listen in to how to participate in repair in these times, and calling on the strength of our connection with each other, the community, the congregation that we have with each other, to learn, to be willing to make mistakes together, to be vulnerable, to be transparent in our process, so that we can serve a time beyond our own. And calling in our ancestors, calling in the ancestors of the place that we live, and those living caretakers of each of the places. Oh, thank you so much for that sense of continuity that we are learning to find ourselves in, and together finding multicultural ways to come together and repair. And thank you to the ones whose cultures are land-based. Thank you for the ways that you have brought us all into a deeper remembrance of our own ancestry that knows how to live in right relationship with the land. Thank you to those ones alive, those ones on the other side, those ones that are with us. We deeply need your presence and call upon you to join us in this work. So thank you to the land, the waters, spirit, all the animals and our ancestors and this bountiful springtime. Thank you for joining us in this deep work. And if we all can just feel our own connection to knowing how Spirit's hand is working through us, then may we have this session that we have together just really be filled with that guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra, for leading that for us and starting us off in a grounded and centered space. Oh, yeah, this work is quite a journey. I feel so privileged to get to work with the Center for Ethical Land Transition and getting to engage with so many people in the work of moving through what it's like to really address ethics and land in a really real way. And so I'm excited to get us into our presentation. And so this is a little recap for those of you who joined us for parts 1 and part 2 of this training. And if you didn't join us for parts 1 and parts 2, that's totally fine. This training really does stand alone. But this space is for inquiry of our beliefs and assumptions. It is a space for examining the impact of colonialism on human relationships. And it's for sharing some practical tools for working with Black and Indigenous folks. And all of this is for the sake of dismantling white supremacy in our lifetimes, making meaningful offers of land justice, and preserving Black and Indigenous life. This space has a lot of purpose to it. And today we're focusing on some specific things, and we're going to try to dive pretty deeply into them. And those are threshold moments for ethical land transitions. We're going to share a case study of a really interesting story of an organization that participated in a land transition. We want to share that story so that you can hear about some missteps or some common things that can happen that CELT has witnessed in this work. And we want to explore how title holders can prepare themselves for land transitions, both as individuals and as groups. And all of this is kind of in the package of a number of practical tools and resources. So there are some very common players of land transitions, and you may see yourself on this list if you happen to be the first one, number 1, title holders, people who already own land. There also are title seekers, which CELT predominantly works with BIPOC groups who are seeking land reunion. And there's also the land itself, which is its own entity. And there are land transition facilitators, such as those of us who work with the Center for Ethical Land Transition. And there's this 5th piece that we name as an entity of its own, which is a future beyond our time that we are all stewarding towards. And even though maybe we're not going to get there in our lifetimes, we have the power to really create the impact in our lifetimes to move towards that future. Today's training kind of particularly zooms into the experience and tools for title holders. And so that's where we're kind of dipping in, although we will still be talking about other players in the land transition process. Now, I want to touch in just briefly on this concept of threshold moments for title holders. And I'm going to go through these. We have 10 of them here, starting with 3, and we're going to come back to these later. And so you may be familiar with these, they may be new, I'm not sure. And there is a fabulous handout that we have that's all about transition moments for ethical land transitions. And so some of the important transition moments that CELT works with title holders are, the first one, an internal assessment of the story of your organization, the story of the land, and your organizational approach to land justice. Another threshold moment is creating a multicultural advisory council to explore different perspectives of what to do with land. Next, internal assessment of the land intended to be transitioned. How simple or how complicated is the situation? What is the status of the facility? What is there to know about the land? Next, decision of how to transfer the property conventionally or uniquely or relationally. And conventionally, of course, is leaning into the conventional real estate system that comes with a listing agent and buying agent, and is a whole amount of paperwork and process. And something that CELT does is we try to open up other possibilities of how to engage in property transfer in ways that are more unique and that are more based on relationships. Next, identifying the different people or roles who should be present at conversations to support the process, such as who will represent the title holders, the title seekers, and other parties. And finally, some things that maybe you are already aware of, such as inspections and appraisals. It's an important threshold moment. Getting into contract, the title holder moving through disclosures and their due diligence. And a couple at the end here are pretty important, especially for people wanting to engage in ethical land transitions, which is understanding the narrative of the land transition, which is, through the process and after the process, what is the story that you have about how the process went? And finally, establishment of a future relationship. Now, all of these threshold moments represent different parts of personal or group process that has to do with the land transition process. And a question just to reflect a little bit right now is, where are you at in this process? Are you familiar with any of these threshold moments that maybe aren't in the conventional system of real estate? And so we will come back to this after we've had a little bit more presentation, but we're going to move forward for now. And we're going to jump into a case study. And I'm going to hand off to Cassandra.
So as Jason just took you through, there are many threshold moments that a title holder has in engaging in the release of the title of the land. And so in conventional, as Jason mentioned, in conventional real estate, the game board and the process is already very laid out. It's very defined by the industry. And when we're bringing a justice-oriented approach, it allows us to slow down and think about tease out other decisions that also really influence the course of action, because of course there's a series of choices that are being made along the way. So as we go into this case study, we're going to be inviting you to think about, what does justice and repair look like in action? And then of course, how can we show up with a justice-oriented approach at each threshold moment? So we're going to be just going very deeply into this story between the Christian church organization and Shelterwood. And the Christian church organization that Shelterwood acquired title from is a Protestant Christian denomination based in the US with approximately 4,800 churches and over 770,000 members. We're not really needing to name the exact church organization, because in a sense, that's not the point. The point is really for us to learn from a church organization that said they had some racial values, healing values, and then how that actually played out when Shelterwood, an Indigenous, Black, and queer-led community collective of forest and land, water protectors, and cultural change makers, purchased 900 acres from the church organization. They're one of their camps. This project completed in June of 2021 in Sonoma County, California. So we're going to go through these threshold moments and one by one talk about how this played out actually between the Christian church organization and Shelterwood. So in the first threshold moment, the internal assessment of values, the CCO actually did before they put the land on the market, they went through an internal church process to state that the 4 resolutions about racial healing. And on their website, they had a public proclamation that they believed in radical racial justice that moved beyond performative anti-racism and required an introspection and internal transformation, both individually and institutionally. So they definitely said the right things in a way, but unfortunately, we saw how this played out. They weren't able to actually embody these values. And so at their next threshold moment, they decided to sell the property in a conventional way. They owned many properties. They had this summer camp, this 900-acre camp. They put it on the market for $3.5 million with a listing agent. And this was actually a very competitive price for what it was. So it brought a lot of attention very suddenly to this site and created a bidding war. And so instead of slowing down that process and thinking about other ways they could have done this, they had a lot of urgency to sell this and sell it fast. So they went on the market and moved through a very quick process with Shelterwood. So when they had there's this huge church organization, right? Like all these representatives. And they, of course, needed to have decision makers to interface with the listing agent. And so they chose just 2 folks to represent the entire church organization and for the sale. And unfortunately, these folks didn't have much direct knowledge of the actual camp. They were like in the administrative realm of decision makers rather than people who had actually been on the ground running the camp. And so they were decision makers and had very little ability, as far as we could tell, to actually embody values of racial healing. And they unfortunately, in this threshold of gathering information about the facility and about land stewardship itself, how these forests were taken care of, how the water systems worked, they didn't actually have, the folks who were representing didn't actually know the property very well at all. And they were working to sell it quickly and didn't really do a lot of work to like gather the information and present it in a way that that would have revealed if they had a deep understanding and care for the land and wanted the next stewards to be able to continue that, they would have taken that time. But they actually didn't involve the actual caretakers, because of course the camp had caretakers, but they were not actually involved. While we were performing our inspections, we unexpectedly met a caretaker who came and was there tending a water system. And he actually he gave us so much information that we needed to know in such a short period of time. But unfortunately, when the CCO found out that he was actually talking to us, that fell out of their control. And so they forbade him from continuing to have a relationship with us during the real estate process. So it was so distinctly not relationship oriented, especially when it came to really caring for the land and the systems and waters of the land. Another moment that that title holders have is that they can participate if they want in helping to inspect and appraise the land that they're transitioning. But in a market-based real estate sale, it's actually acceptable for them to do none of that. And so the CCO did not do any of that. They didn't pay for any appraisal or inspection, and instead Shelterwood, this BIPOC organization raising the funds to acquire this land, also had to pay over $30,000 to inspect this camp and all of its buildings and systems. And so the seller, we'll go to the next, the seller due diligence and supporting the buyers. In ethical land transition, we feel like the seller needs to do diligence too, to make sure that the transition is that the new stewards are getting as much support as they can for their stewardship of the land. But our inspections revealed quite dangerous, not just deferred maintenance, but actually quite dangerous things. Propane leak, mold in the kitchen, caved in septic systems, substantial problems with the swimming pool. None of which the CCO was actually willing to fix, to just take care of as part of the process, but instead just offered a $58,000 credit. And after you hear a little bit more about the financial details, you'll realize, wow, that was actually really nothing. Certainly not for what was discovered in the inspections. The condition that being transparent about the condition of the property, disclosing the duty to disclose. It was discovered late in the escrow that the CCO actually misrepresented the condition of the forest and the last time the forest was logged. And so Shelterwood, continuing in their diligence, and that one caretaker said, you might find some files over there. And then upon looking at those files and contacting more folks, we realized that the forest had actually been completely mismanaged and logged much more recently than the CCO had disclosed. This is actually I can't say it's not wise from a legal standpoint to do something like misrepresent a property as well, but we encountered this. So in this story of the land transition, here you had a property listed on the market for $3.5 million in a very competitive context. Shelterwood ended up having to pay $4 million to acquire this property. It is an incredible fact that they had funders that believed in their vision. It was a very compelling vision, and they had funders believing in them and supporting them and acquiring at this level. But on the other side, the CCO actually perceived that since they chose a BIPOC organization, that it was an example of racial justice and healing, and that they had actually participated in land justice. But of course, the narrative of the land transition, according to Shelterwood, is that the CCO actually didn't really know anything about the facility and didn't really meaningfully get to know the land that they were selling, and therefore be able to have a responsible handover. They did not openly share information or help Shelterwood have a meaningful relationship with the caretakers. They were deceptive about the condition of the land, didn't support any costs for the inspections, nor offer the price credits that would have matched the level of dangerous and damaged facilities that we encountered. And it could be said that they sold to Shelterwood because they were the highest bidder. And really we only had 3 weeks for our inspections, and which is an intense time frame to and sense of urgency that was so hard on the Shelterwood team. It was to withstanding a conventional real estate process, even when you're well funded, is a harrowing experience. And even when you have agents who are standing with you and using our positionality as best as we can, it was a harrowing experience. And then to not when not be willing to work with us with what we found out during the inspections, and actually threatening to pull out of the deal when we asked for repairs. It was very intense process and full of more rupture rather than repair. So of course, in the moment, the threshold moment, oh, thank you. Lael Camargo, one of the co-founders of Shelterwood, said that they got the best of both worlds. They got the most money and they had BIPOC buyers. So in a sense, they really, they got the best of both worlds. They could have a narrative, whether it was true or not, about racial healing, but ultimately they got the most money in a very short period of time. So you could understand that then at the threshold of establishing a future relationship, which of course the CCO wanted to have a future relationship with this camp and with Shelterwood, but they acknowledged none of the harm that they had caused in the land transition process. They wanted to have future access. They even, after all of this, asked Shelterwood if they would speak at a public event for their congregation. And at that event, they would have been forbidden to name the fact that they paid $4 million, $500,000 over asking for the camp. So that kind of behavior, of course, is not conducive to future relationship. Shelterwood, of course, declined to participate in that event, and yet in Shelterwood's community events that they hosted after coming into stewardship of the land, they invited folks who had a historic relationship with the land, seeking to really honor those people in their relationship with the land, because they knew that those folks weren't necessarily the administration of this large church organization. They were real people with a real care and relationship with the land. And Shelterwood, as true land stewards, actually knew that and had the generosity of spirit to invite those folks to come and visit and share their connection with the land. So it's a big story. It was a big one to live through, and one for us to continue to learn from. So I know after I tell it, I need to take a deep breath. So I invite you to as well.
Thank you, Cass. And I just want to jump in and invite everyone who just witnessed this story as Cass shared it to just take a minute to reflect on this case study and write down anything that comes up for you. And an additional question for reflection right now is, what are some key ways that you think the CCO could have approached their land transition differently? And just about 20 more seconds for writing right now if you're taking some notes or responding to this question. All right. And for now, I'm going to ask everyone to hold on to your response. We will have a chance to do some sharing in response to this question and ask for your reflections, but we're going to move forward for now, and then we're going to come back to it. So I'm going to dive into a little presentation about what a rupture and repair approach means. Rupture and repair is something that we can use to really try to move through times that we cause rupture and pain when we're working in land transitions or really doing anything in the world where we're interfacing with people who experience marginalization and experience racism. And rupture and repair is defined in a few ways. The settler colonial history of marginalizing BIPOC folks and seeking to erase their culture has created a state of untended ruptures. In order to do repair, we must understand the ruptures in relationship with the land and its historic inhabitants caused by our ancestors. We acknowledge that ruptures of the past create a context that makes micro ruptures and microaggressions prevalent in interactions today. And we can work on developing skills to identify current ruptures when they happen and practice appropriate responses of repair. And this rupture and repair in action is really about holding a context, holding the bigger context of history of this continent that we're on, history of different cultures, the history of marginalization and of oppression. And we're really trying to hold that history and acknowledge that it affects everyone to this current day in really significant ways. And the more that we can hold space for that and make space for that and acknowledge the way that our actions can be hurtful, the better chance we have at moving forward in meaningful ways. One piece about addressing something like a land transition from a rupture and repair approach is doing an activity that centers around truth and storytelling for the land. And this is something that you could do for yourself if you are personally a title holder of land, or it could be something that you and your group or your congregation might do together, which is conducting an honest assessment of what is the story of the land, including the involvement of your ancestors of blood, ethnicity, and spiritual affiliation, including the story of your own history and involvement up to the present day. And when we do this assessment, it is not just the relationship between humans and land that you might consider, but also the human-human relationships with those who previously lived on the land, who came before, those who arrived on this continent. Another piece of rupture and repair is working on internal accountability for your group. And a big piece about internal accountability that I really want to highlight is that all of us need emotional and spiritual support for this work. There aren't exceptions to that. And even as we are working in a very challenging context, and we're working in the context and systems of oppression where people have been marginalized in ways that bring us to this current day of inequity, that doesn't mean that those who have more privilege don't need emotional and spiritual support. And because of that, we really recommend that before engaging with BIPOC community, you create a support group of peers to share and explore your values, your feelings, and your concerns and more about the work ahead. And this can include practicing identifying microaggressions and racist assumptions. It can include practicing calling in members. Calling in is a phrase that we use instead of the term calling out. Calling out has kind of a connotation of being kind of loud and fierce in the way that you suddenly tell someone that you think that something they said was hurtful. Calling in is holding someone in a container that feels safer and feels more caring, but is still using accountability to really hold someone in understanding of the impact of their words or actions. And so we can work on practicing that. Practice calling in members if you feel like their opinions and actions are not aligned with the group's values. This is a challenging one as well, because in your groups, being able to gently share with people if you feel like their opinions and actions aren't aligned can be a challenging thing. And it's why we recommend practicing that. The more our teams are able to develop trust by engaging in difficult conversations, the stronger we become to do justice-oriented work. And it can be very common that there's a lot unsaid in a conversation or unsaid in a room, even if it feels like there's tension. And we really have the charge, we have the assignment to really try to engage in difficult conversations, because that allows us to actually engage with the work that is in front of us. And in terms of rupture and repair in real time while meeting with BIPOC groups, and this is, ideally after you've already had time to reflect on the truth and storytelling and how it affects the land, the history of the land that is in question, and that you've already created an accountability group to hold space for feelings and reactions of how to approach this work and what shared values and ethics are. Then in doing the actual work, we also have to humble ourselves in a number of ways, such as accepting that we will mess up. That's a big one, because we will mess up. Justice-oriented work is full of accidents and missteps and doing things in imperfect ways. But showing up to the work means that as we mess up, we can learn from that. Also, it's not appropriate to process our grief and shame with the BIPOC folks who around us who may have been impacted by micro ruptures or microaggressions. And this is a big piece that you likely have heard about, I hope, in terms of the social justice movement, which is really trying to not put the emotional burden on people who are of marginalized communities, who are most impacted by inequity and systemic oppression. It's really not appropriate to then expect those individuals to hold emotional space for you when you're processing your feelings. And again, that doesn't mean that you don't get to have a place to process your feelings. You need a place to process your feelings. But it does mean that we're choosing more appropriate places, appropriate containers for our feelings to be held. And when micro ruptures happen, we focus on our reparative actions of acknowledging that it happened, of making an apology, of recommitting to actions of repair, and getting back to work. And this really is a skill to practice, which is noticing when there is a micro rupture, noticing when your words or the words of somebody else have caused a negative rift or have caused injury, and being able to acknowledge it and still move forward and not getting too hung up on it. But that acknowledgement and that apology is still very, very essential. And by having an acknowledgement and an apology, people can see that you are actually doing the work of trying to recognize these micro ruptures and recognizing how we can absolutely have a negative impact and say hurtful things to people, even if it's unintentionally while we're doing this work. Some other tools for working with BIPOC groups in real time are pay attention and do more listening than talking. If you cause a microaggression or micro rupture, take a step back. Avoid taking up more space processing your feelings. If someone else redirects the conversation, let it be, and trust you will have a chance to unpack what happened later outside of the meeting. If you witness a rupture occur, practice acknowledging it in a respectful way and allow the meeting to continue. And this is part of the practice of calling in, of being able to acknowledge that something happened even to someone else who was on your own team in real time, being able to acknowledge that what they said may have had a negative impact or may have been hurtful, and allowing it to still move forward, allowing the meeting to continue. And another very essential piece is always scheduling an internal review session after each meeting you have with BIPOC groups, so that you do have the space to have reflection and feedback and accountability among your group. And a big reminder, just as we cap off this section, is that justice-oriented work is never about a single moment of decision. It is a sequence of decisions made throughout a process. A big part of why we have the list of the threshold moments for ethical land transitions is to illustrate how there isn't one defining moment that represents a justice-oriented approach. There is a whole string of threshold moments where decisions get made, and committing to justice-oriented work is about engaging with all of those decisions. And when we mess up, we do have the power to step back into our ethical alignment for the next moment of decision-making. And now I'm going to put up our reflection questions, the one that we already saw and an additional one. We'll have a couple of minutes for people to reflect and write, and then we'll have a few minutes for shares to our whole group. And our first question that appeared earlier was, what are some key ways you think the CCO could have approached their land transition differently? And we're also curious to reflect on what can you do to create a support group of accountability for your process. And of course, this support group, this accountability group, is an internal group for the people in your immediate circle who are tasked with making a land transition happen. So please take a little bit of time to reflect on this and maybe write some things down. And we'll come back in a minute and invite people to share for the whole group. All right, and as you wrap up what you have written for in response to those questions, if anyone has something that they want to share in response, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom. My gosh, I see Pat raising their hand, and you know what? I noticed that I don't even know where the raise hand feature is in Zoom. Sarah, can you tell me where it is, please?
Yes, you can raise your hand with the reaction button, that then there's a little bar that says raise hand, and then you'll pop up to the top of the screen. But old fashioned way might work too. We might be able to spot you.
Awesome. So I did see Pat put up an actual hand and then a raised hand. So let's see if we can unmute you, Pat, and go to you.
You know, my thoughts are quite simple because this is very complex. But it is true that if you take a person from the CCO and it's just one person, that's very limited. We pretty much need to work as a team. And on that team, when you're thinking about selling property, you certainly want different experts on the team of the, let's say, 3 people dealing with the sale of the property. And that in any case, to go back to, like, say, a leadership group or whomever, to be able to bounce all of that off and have that leadership group ready to say, well, what came up about racial injustice or racial justice, or so to have a conversation going on. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard Pat talking about that concept of really bringing in people who are skilled in a variety of ways. And it's very true. The idea of whittling an organization down to just a couple of representatives, you'd have to be very skilled to really represent a large organization with just a couple of people. All right, let's go to Mary Jo.
Similarly, thank you for this presentation. Similarly to what Pat said, you need to be able to consult with experts. And I was wondering, you knew about this organization, so if they consulted with you, with the Center for Ethical Land Transitions, if they were open to that, because I think another piece is that if you're going to work through a process, you need to be open to learning and open to taking the time. And it didn't sound like either they didn't have the time, they had to sell land quickly, or for some reason, they didn't take the time for the learning process and looking at, as Pat said, it's so complicated to look at all the angles of it in order to be able to make a more just decision in terms of their land transition.
I think that's such a good point, because the Center for Ethical Land Transition wasn't there for the CCO. You know, we were there for Shelterwood, or I and my real estate partner got to be the agents representing Shelterwood. And so, you know, that's why at the beginning I say, we're going to learn from this, but we're not going to this isn't about putting that CCO on trial per se, because it really does speak to the need for support structures. They didn't have the nuns and nuns. They didn't have this land justice, educational process that you all are going through to help really get the support that they would have needed to have lined up with those racial justice proclamations that they made, and had gotten the support for what that would have looked like in a land transition, to have slowed the process down, to have gathered that team, to have, really thought about how they could have maybe still needed to sell it. On some level, it's like, okay, they needed money for it. I mean, it may not have been something they could have felt that they could have given away, but even if they could have slowed the process down and been more actionable land stewards during the process, it would have been a very different, even if the outcome is that they still sold it for $3.5 or $4 million. So I really agree. They needed support that didn't yet exist. So here we are.
And let's go to Robert. I see your hand raised. Hold on one sec, Robert. We got to unmute you.
I
There.
would approach the Christian church organization first by asking what type of polity they have. If it's decision from higher down, then you're going to run into trouble. If it's like a congregational based system, which will have to have a vote, you would probably encourage a team to be participant, and you would also require the people who are most knowledgeable of the land to be part of that team as part of the agreement in the purchase of that land. You know, for instance, the UCC would have to, if it was that, but I don't think it was, would have to have basically a congregational meeting on that to decide that they're going to purchase and accept an offer. And so certainly I think it's polity. If it was a Roman Catholic, it could be very authoritarian, basically in the hands of the diocesan bishop. There are different approaches, and polity does make a influence on the whole process.
Good point. For sure.
Sarah, let's go to you. Do you have a response?
Sort of just a build on, I swear I'm not a plant. This is a genuine response. I'm just thinking about the importance, and this is something we're learning in our work with religious communities, and the specific ones we're working with, is just the real importance of holding spaces for internal coherence within a group, and kind of understanding, to what you're saying, what's actually the decision-making process? What are the channels? What are the committees that this needs to go through? Who needs to have a say? And just really foundational pieces of, like, what do we understand racial justice to mean in the context of a land transition? What do we understand land justice to mean? What is it and what is it not? And we'll get to this, you know, with your rubric, but, you know, we're working on a lot of assessment tools, including for the land itself and storytelling around that, but also around, how do you know when your group is aligned enough and ready enough to actually move forward in good faith and with kind of an understood container around, how are we going to be in this relationship building process with future stewards? So I just want to name the importance of that we're recognizing in the work, and just like, I'm excited to get into, you know, what comes next, because I think it'll be really helpful.
Thanks, Sarah. I just want to mention what I see Coco B has put in the chat about their experience working or being aware of Indigenous communities, and that time has a different context and a different meaning to a lot of different people. And that what is seen as a deal or seen as, you know, a timeline for a land transition for Indigenous folks, Indigenous kin, that often has to do with a much longer time frame. And I know I have heard from Indigenous elders that are in my life the concept of 7 generations forward, thinking about transitions that are deep and lasting and long, and that you can't know a place or care for a place unless you're committing to it for many, many generations. So thank you for that addition. And let's move over to Stacy.
Hi, I feel like a lot of what I was thinking has already been expressed. Again, why the rush? I mean, that in and of itself begs the question of the ethics and possibly even some criminal behavior on the part of this, I keep wanting to say a CEO, but this decision-making body. And it also just really begs the question of who and when do you bring in legal counsel and real estate counsel? Who are you working with? Do they understand you as an organization and the values that you bring to the table? I mean, it's so critical. And yet back to, the comment somebody made about this was a business transaction and they wanted it done quick and dirty. So why? Again, there's that ethical / criminal question, but there is also just the reminder, it's so important to find the counselors. And as a public relations practitioner, I just find it's so important to have those people that see the system. Let's look at the systems and look at who is going to be impacted by these decisions. So that was just my thought.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I wonder if the CCO also, needed to sell and for financial reasons, and then in that opted for a very quick process, and I'm sure they had legal counsel, but a lot of that directs people down very conventional channels. It's like, get a listing agent and do your thing, which that legal counsel should, I think, have counseled them to have a more thorough process of disclosure, for sure. We brought, myself and my co-agent, we brought multiple legal counsel to the table to support Shelterwood along the way, including our own support of them. But again, when the game, when the sort of the game board is set in the real estate industry, it has very predetermined channels of the way things play out, and it is very far from just. So let's hear from Maureen.
Yeah, it seems like there were so many things. It's hard to know where to start. But just trying to think of the complexity of things. What are the other possibilities or the other processes besides the conventional, besides the straight business dealing, that you won't have some people in the group saying, no, it has to be this way, it's the only legal way? Or, what are some alternatives that could be really to know before this gets very far, how much that's embraced, by a group as a way to deal with the BIPOC group that you would be working with? I mean, have some things understood, because the conventional way can be pretty unbending.
Yeah, it's true. And in my, I've been in real estate for 20 years. And so I've seen a lot of different ways that people try to bring a more human and land-centric approach to land transitions. And something that I think that is still really important is that, as much as it can feel like everybody come to the table, we'll have a facilitator or a group of facilitators to help everybody at that table go through a very, conscientious land transition. It actually can, we're realizing as we're learning and going deeper into this work, that it does make sense, not in an agent antagonism or agent buffering the people from actually having relationship with each other, but that it can be really helpful for each. And I like to think of it as side of the circle, like as if we're all in the land and we're all in the circle of concern, but that the folks who are releasing title need some particular kind of support. And then the folks reuniting with the stewardship relationship and title with the land need a specific kind of support. So I think ideally we would have all of that held within an analysis of colonization and repair and a big movement process that we're in our times. We're at the very beginning of being an organization that can bridge the real estate industry with that kind of much more, land-centric, culturally affirming transition support. So, but I hope that is helpful to kind of help think about that. I think it's still helpful to think that each sort of party needs a particular kind of holding.
I also want to mention that a big part of this presentation, a big part of our purpose, is to really share some of the tools that our organization has created in relation to this. And that comes across in the document of the thresholds of ethical land transitions. and also with the rubric that has a lot to do with the sort of internal assessment that we're going to go into later. We're about to enter breakout rooms in order to talk about some of these threshold moments and to make sure that there is time for people to kind of work on them and assess where they're at as a group. And I'm curious, I can't tell what the one person with your hand raised, if your name is Lou or Louis, can you tell me what your name is? We have just a moment for a comment from you. We don't have too long for moving forward, but.
Can you hear me? Is my mic working?
Yes.
Okay. I'm in the process of working with a Black family, and a business has purchased land all around them, and their home and their community center for the Black population was never included in it. Well, the business says they want to be accommodating, but their intention is not. So why do I worry about their intention if we don't want this family? They're finding all kinds of blockades from this business. They can't even get out of their house. And so the history of that family being there is over 150 years in that home. And so I guess I feel like I can't, what I need to do is remind the business that they want to be accommodating and that the home never was for sale, nor the Black community center never was for sale. You happen to buy a church that you're renovating for a brewery. I don't know, I mean, I don't, and this family absolutely, in this community, the Black community, cannot afford legal representation at all. I mean, they cannot. So how much time and effort do I give to the brewery? Or do I gently try and remind them of the history of the land and the story of this family? And in fact, there are other places they can access their business from parking lots that are just across the street. How do you do that? And keep the intent of not rupturing and that it's a transition. How do you do that with this process?
You know, I very much so respect this question. And also you're asking a very large question that isn't quite in line with where we're at right now in our presentation. So it is something to write down and to hold on to. And there may be time later for our general reflections, but I think that that's a pretty unique position that you're in right now, not as a title holder. And that's part of the context that we're diving into right now. But still a very, very valuable question. And I don't mean to dismiss it, but I think that the response to that could be many, many things.
Okay. I have to leave in a half an hour. I have another meeting. So, but thank you. And I will stay as long as I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're about to jump into a breakout room. And for this breakout room, we're wanting to give some space to reflect on where you are at among these threshold moments. This screenshot will get sent as an image to the breakout room so you can reflect on it. And also for those of you who have printed the worksheet, the threshold moments and ethical land transitions, these are some of the ones that appear on that worksheet. And since now we've heard the story of the CCO and of Shelterwood and walked through some of the transition moments that, the threshold moments that they experienced and the decisions that they made, we want to give you a chance to really reflect together in groups of where you're at in your land transition process in relationship to these threshold moments. And so we will have about 16 to 18 minutes with 4 people per room. And I just want to invite people to please take turns talking and do your best to moderate so that everyone can speak for 3 or 4 minutes. So there's enough time for everyone to share. And again, our question is, where do you think you are at in your own process in relation to these threshold moments? And
Jason, before I go do that, will you drop the link to the slide you want people to be able to view into the chat so that people can click on it now, because the chat will likely disappear. I can broadcast the question, but that's probably too much text to broadcast.
for sure. 1 second.
And
So
we'll have about 4 participants per room. Some might have 5, but we can make do.
okay, so I just dropped that in the chat. So yes, as Sarah just mentioned, please navigate to the chat in your Zoom window, which you'll get to by clicking the chat icon in the very bottom middle. And I just put in the document that's called Breakout Room 1 Questions. And if you click or double click on that, those questions should appear for you.
All right, well, if you've got the question ready, I'm going to go ahead and create the breakout room. So just click join when a box comes up for you. Enjoy. We'll be back in about 16 minutes. Oh, sorry, it didn't open. There you go. Let's see, and Jason, I'm going to broadcast the question too, just so that just the top part.
Do you need the
Are-
text?
Hmm?
Do you need
Are
the
we
text?
Sorry.
Just the headline question, not all the threshold moments. But I'll broadcast message, not my voice. And other folks here, are you having trouble with any of the oh, I'm going to pause the recording.
Sarah, this is Carol speaking. We were only 2 in our group and my partner couldn't be heard. And so we did the
Oh, I'm
best
so
we
sorry.
could. But
I'm so
Yeah.
sorry about that. Yeah, some of the rooms I realized had presenters put in them, so not everyone had 4. Welcome back, everyone.
we
We're
were in,
We're gonna get right started.
okay.
Yeah, I'm
Jason?
sorry to hear that we had a couple of technical issues in the Zoom groups. Zoom is an incredible tool, and it's a bummer
is.
that it doesn't always work right. So
It is. We were at group 11 in case if we're going back and Mary Ray is right over here and she was my partner gesturing back and forth.
Got it. So we're almost at the point where we're going to take a whole group break. Before we do that, we're going to have a little bit of time, about 8 to 10 minutes, for any shares or responses to this question of where you are at in relation with your group to these threshold moments. Now, it's a pretty big question, but we're curious if there's anyone who is interested and willing to share a little bit about what you talked about in your breakout session. And you can use the raise hand feature. If you're not sure where that is, you're also welcome to just put your hand up a little bit close to your camera and we'll know to call on you that way. Let's go to Stacy.
I'm just going to dive in and ask the question that's been burning in my brain for some time. So as a communicator for a Catholic, a congregation of vowed Catholic sisters, what role as you begin to form this assessment group or form this committee? I would gather many of the congregations represented here, an early iteration of a diocese was involved in their acquisition of their land. So my question is, at what point does a congregation kind of bring into play a player from a historic standpoint that could be instrumental and or influenced by your your steps to unveil or unveil or begin this open time of communications. Does that make sense?
I think what you're asking, Stacy, is given the sort of list of tools and the list of threshold moments that we've put forward, what is the time for a diocese or congregation to engage in saying, yes, we want to do a land transition in a more ethical way? I'm not sure that there's one response to this, but I will point out that some of the suggestions for those threshold moments are things like the truth and storytelling activity. And that's something that you could do with a congregation or with a community that's part of a religious organization, part of a church, whether or not you're going to do a land transition process, just to try to understand what the history is of that land and how people feel about it, about the human land relationships. Similarly,
Thank you.
it doesn't have to be the whole church necessarily that's having a deep dive into the personal values and ethics that the individuals want to uphold in relationship to themselves, each other, and to their church. And so I think that there's plenty of things there that might start out as a smaller group within a congregation doing some of those things, and then being able to bring the sort of outcome and learnings of those to the larger group. And I think can see a lot of movement happening in land justice and social justice when smaller groups engage with the material and then bring it to the larger group, bring it to those who are kind of holding the keys or holding the positions of power. And that's a way that I think that you may be able to create influence without waiting for some decree from the person or people who are actually in power.
Thank you. That's helpful.
And let's go over to Robert.
One of the effective ways of telling story, you might look to our neighbors north in Canada. The Mennonites started something that really took on a kind of explosive sort of expansion, and that is the blanket ceremony. The blanket ceremony has had over 25 years. If you look up Kairos blanket ceremony, to pull that up on this, over 160,000 people have gone through it, Canadians, mostly people of faith and Indigenous peoples, as well as additionally had 5,000 seminars on the issues. It tells a story of the underside of whose occupants land was begun with narratively, with blankets out measuring the lands, and people were invited to beyond the land. And as the story is told, the blankets shrink and erode and embodies form of learning of what it means to be displaced or even exterminated. And the blanket is removed. And I had one person from my church say, it was just like experience of eviction. Okay, that was a really positive step, but it eventually brought the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada forward. And more lately, Prime Minister Trudeau adopted publicly the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to begin to transform Canadian society and bring Indigenous peoples part in more dialogue with the government. And I think that was at least a positive step forward. It has wrinkles, but what it did was basically tell the story and force congregations to understand their complicity in the massive land grab or genocide that took place with European colonization, and forcing us to ask the question, how do we do land acknowledgement, and what are our responsibilities for our past history and our current benefits as from colonization. So that's a good way of telling stories in an embodied way where people understand. So I recommend you look at that at this point.
Thank you, Robert. you know, when I hear you share that example, it makes me think about oral tradition and the immense amount of history and tradition that is held in oral tradition in different communities. And I know I can speak for myself, being descendants primarily of Western European colonial settlers, that oral tradition in a lot of the dominant cultures who used domination over others, oral tradition often did not survive very much. And the tradition of domination has been written in the history books that we go to and read, that is often bereft of oral tradition and of true representation. But I'm hearing what Robert is really saying about, you know, the use of, you know, a physical item in order to inspire and connect to an oral tradition is a really beautiful and profound thing. And would also point out there too that something about reflecting and creating a truth and storytelling, you know, circle for a congregation or for a community is maybe looking for inspiration at other places, but also arriving on your own way of sharing your truth and storytelling about a place. And with that said, there are really great examples of that. So thank you, Robert, for sharing. And I see that we have JC with a hand up.
I just am being pedantic and autistic, but I am Canadian. And I just have to clarify, Prime Minister Trudeau, he did not actually carte blanche adopt the UN DRIP proclamation. It's been left up to each of the premiers of each province how far down that road they want to go. So just on behalf of Canadians and our history, he didn't actually go all the way. Thank you.
That's an important distinction, just as the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery that happened recently is super exciting and also is like a step. You know, repudiation is not, you know, rescind or repeal or quite there. So it sounds like in Canada there's the good blessings to make that additional step, but that it's not quite a mandate for the whole country of Canada. I'm going to see if there's an additional hand, again, reflecting on our question about where you think you're at in relationship to some of the threshold moments that were shared. I think we have time for one more share before we take a break, and then we'll come back together. All right, LaDonna, let's go to you.
Thank you. The three of the four of us who were in our group just said we're really at the very beginning of this and trying to learn more about how we might do this if, you know, when that opportunity is the now. So this is, you know, many of us are aware of and have done some homework on who were the people who were here before us, and we know our own history and learning more, and some have made connections with the communities of Indigenous who lived this land before we did. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And it's certainly a step. It's certainly a step forward to be doing that investigation and attempting to make contact and connection with Indigenous communities. So it's really been, you know, a very recent thing, even just as indigeneity and history is taught in public schools. It's a very recent thing, just in the last, you know, 10 or 20 years, that there's been more widespread awareness that Indigenous folks were not just completely wiped out. And it's very interesting and very saddening to listen to Indigenous elders who, you know, whose existence was so marginalized that the history books stated that they no longer existed. And with that said, we exist in an incredible time where so many Indigenous communities are coming forward and are really claiming their culture and are really attempting and hopeful that they get to be back into a position of active land stewardship. And that's why we're here. And of course, when I say Indigenous people, we also want to make sure that we're including people of color, including Black people and those who were formerly enslaved people, because their legacy is very, very tied to this as well. And it is about Indigenous people being removed from their lands. And it's also about humans who were stolen humans who were brought to stolen land. And that legacy is just as present with this as we move forward in this justice work. And with that said, I'm going to say that it's time for us to take a break. We're going to go for about an 8-minute break. So we're going to come back just, I don't know, a minute before, about 11:49. So please take time to use the bathroom if you need to, and drink some water or have a snack. We're going to come back and dive right back into some more content. So we'll see you very soon. So go ahead.
Welcome back, everyone.
All right. Hope everyone had a moment to be with themselves in whatever way you and your body needed. And we're going to dive right back in. So we do have a plenty to present, and then also plenty of time for more reflection and an additional breakout room. So that will give everyone an opportunity to work with some of the content that we're presenting. And so I am going to jump over to sharing my screen again, and I'm going to hand off the facilitation to Cassandra.
All right, everybody. I know that this is a lot of content, and I really appreciate you all sticking with it. We do have a tool that we developed called Threshold Moments for title holders in land transitions. And so we hope that you will use this tool to just go deeper into exploring these different threshold moments, and how, with all the support that hopefully you're getting, you'll be able to handle these with so much more discernment and consciousness. So Jason, do you want to remind folks where those are for people?
That handout should have come in an email directly from Nuns and Nuns, sent about a week ago. I believe that they sent
And
it
it
out.
looks like Abby just also loaded it into the chat.
Awesome.
Yeah, so please do that. We're going to spend just a little bit of time right now talking about genuine land offers. So taking a deeper look at what, like, I guess, a false offer might look like. So we interviewed 3 folks that to just help flesh out our own experience, 3 Indigenous and multiculturally, involved folks to help us in preparing this training. So Lael Redbird and L. Frank were all interviewed, and each really spoke to the importance of making a genuine land offer and helped us elucidate what a false offer looks like. And of course, a hollow declaration to Indigenous, to the original peoples of the land, that this is your land, just saying that, or even, the land acknowledgements that we do now, which I think are helpful, continual reminders, collective reminders that we're all involved in, to help remember the territories and often unceded lands upon which we live. It's really important to do that, but it's also important to take action with legal changes and access granted through cultural easements or other ways to make sure that it's not just a hollow declaration. Often groups will offer to BIPOC folks to step into something that's already going on. Like, here's how we're doing things, and we're learning about equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we're going to invite you into what we're doing, because that's what we think we're supposed to do. You know, that doesn't actually give folks true equity and the opportunity to bring their own cosmologies and relationships to the land in a way that is authentic and affirming to their land-based journey. So it's really important that we don't just assume that by inclusion into an existing process or business or program happening with the land, that answers the question. Al Frank had this very intense reflection for us to be with, that when there's an exchange, the strings that come attached are actually like chains. That's not a reparative offer of land transition, of course. So we're needing to really look at that in depth when we're going through a transition. So title holders often, like we saw with the CCO, express an interest in land justice, but then still use a conventional system, highest bidder, competitive real estate strategy, and not sharing information that would be helpful to the group until later in the process. And so, of course, these are not genuine offers, land offers. These are ones that come still inside of a very dominant system that itself has got racist roots and continues to express itself in ways that are full of direct racism as well as systemic oppression. So what are some elements of a genuine land offer? I think that, you know, we're really getting into it here with these other thresholds that you could really think about your situation. What are your values? What is the circumstance that you're actually dealing with before you start that relationship? So doing all this work of the internal assessment, and really situating yourself in the story of colonization and in the story of the land and the human to human and land to human relationships. And so that you really understand your circumstance to begin with. Do your homework, do that education. And then when you're looking to make a land transition, are you making a full title transition? Are the title seekers, the ones in the reunion seat, are they going to be able to steward the land on their own terms? Or what are the potential stipulations that you might have? So there's all sorts of things that maybe you still want to extend relationship and transition opportunity, but it may not be until sometimes until like at the end of life, or there may be, we can't transition all the land, but we can transition part of the land, or it's a phased transition. So to just be aware that if you have needs, that doesn't make it that you can't do something. It's just to be really clear about what the group needs, what the title holding group needs in the transition. And of course, if you have a wish or expectation of future involvement, to be really clear about that. Oftentimes an appraisal or other kind of evaluation can help you understand whether you can transition the property at a discount to market price, or if forces exist within your community that you actually need to transition it to market price. Just being really clear about that. And oftentimes you can extend time. Like we saw that CCO didn't extend time. Sometimes if you have to hold on for various reasons to a particular price because of your title holding decision-making group, you might be able to extend time. So something here that is really becoming clear to us as we do this work is that for the genuineness of your offer to be an expression of your deepening of your relationship with the land, so that stewardship it can express itself in this, and I think Coco spoke to this in their comment, that there's a long-term story of the land going back generations, going forward generations, such that even as you might be relinquishing power or title over the land, that even in that case, or even especially in that place, it could be seen as a deepening of and a more meaningful expression of stewardship to serve the reunion of the land with the culture bearers that can reunite in kinship with that land. That is an expression of your stewardship. Not so relinquishment may not be like that sort of break and walk away and we're done. It's actually part of this, being part of the continuation of the whole story.
Thank you, Cass. Now, I'm going to jump in and add on to what we're talking about in terms of genuine offers, and we're going to use the tool of our genuine offers and ethical land transitions rubric. And so if you do have a printed copy in front of you that you looked at before this presentation, please have that now. And I always recommend that, while someone is reading something that appears on the page in front of you, it is really helpful to highlight or underline while you are listening any parts of the text that resonate with you as we go through it. And if you don't have that printed, that's all right. Much of the text is going to come up on the screen as we go through it. And after we present this rubric, we will have breakout rooms again for more discussion, and we'll have time to share and connect as a whole group again. And for the sake of this presentation, even though there are 7 whole strands and each strand of the rubric has a score 4, score 3, score 2, and score 1 and 0, I will only be diving into the kind of the binaries, the polarities of what it looks like to be most in integrity or get the highest score for one strand of the rubric, and what it looks like to get the lowest score. And as I explain the material in the rubric, I'm going to ask Cassandra after each strand to reflect on how she would rate the Christian church organization, the CCO, that we dove into the storytelling previously about. So the first strand of the rubric is sovereignty for new stewards. And this is addressing the question of, does this land transition offer the title seekers sovereignty and agency of how they wish to steward the land? I will offer, just for clarification, that we use the language title holders and title seekers interchangeably with the concepts of seller and buyer. Title seekers are those who would be in the buying position, who are seeking the title of the land. Title holders are ones who are already in ownership. We use the different terms, though, because we want to try to shift the consciousness around ownership of land and bring it into more alignment with ethics and what we're working on in terms of ethical land transitions. So strand 1, again, is about sovereignty, which is about agency for the new stewards of the land, and if agency and sovereignty is offered to them. And the highest form on our rubric is that title seekers will have sovereignty and agency to choose how to steward the land into the future and with whom to involve without imposition of others. Title holders fully relinquish power and influence pertaining to the land. There are no strings attached. And the far end, the far bottom of this strand is that future stewards having sovereignty or agency is not part of the land transition. An entity other than the new land stewards makes the decisions about how the land will be used and tended. And that might be the situation where there is still an organization, there is still a corporation, an LLC, or a church, or something that actually is retaining all of the power of what happens to the future of the land. But there's maybe some desire to bring in other stewards. And Cassandra, what do you think about the CCO and Shelterwood land transition in terms of sovereignty?
Well, the very interesting thing that we learned in that process is that one benefit of a real estate sale in the way that it was transacted by the CCO, and is that this gives the BIPOC title seekers reunion folks, that's another word we use, the full sovereignty. So that in the sense that they can muster the financial wherewithal and the legal capacity to take on the stewardship of this land. So I believe on all these rubrics, this is the one place where CCO gets the highest score because of their engagement, and because it actually, gave a firewall in a sense in the process. So for better or worse, that is one element of benefit. The Shelterwood didn't have to relate with the CCO anymore.
And I would add on to that it sounds like that means that in the conventional system, to sell land or to purchase land, if you're the purchaser, that you get the full legal agency to do what you want with that land. And this question about sovereignty for new stewards, then, especially in terms of ethical land transitions, it comes up more when land then isn't just sold at the market value to the highest bidder. It really comes up if it is some type of reparations, if it is some type of meaningful contribution to those seeking land reunion, in which case then it is a larger question of to what extent those seeking reunion do they still, will they end up having full agency even if they did not pay market value for the land? And that's a big question. The second strand of our rubric is on future involvement. Do the title holders express their interest in future involvement, and how do they act if relationships degrade? The top score on our rubric is title holders clearly state and negotiate their desires for future involvement in conversations with the new stewards. If conflict arises, the new steward's vision of how to care for the land is prioritized. Title holders graciously step back if asked, minimizing emotional labor being taken on by the new stewards. And the lowest score we have for this rubric is that title holders may or may not be clear about their desires for future involvement. If the future involvement does not happen in a way that pleases them, they may make unanticipated demands or become an oppositional force seeking to harm and slander the new stewards. And Cass, what do you think? Does the Shelterwood and CCO example, does it fit somewhere on this rubric strand?
Well, again, it's a little bit interesting because of the what we talked about in the last rubric, in terms of that clarity of the actual title transition in the real estate process. So I would kind of put it in between, probably around the 2 zone in this rubric, just because they wanted to have future involvement. They made requests in unclear ways along the path of the land transition, in a way that would work for them. But they, I don't think that they became an oppositional force seeking to harm and slander the new. So they did step back, and I think even if they didn't seek to harm, they still caused harm through their requests, but they didn't. It wasn't in a slanderous way. But I would say maybe a more misrepresented way.
And I would point out too that this future involvement, the highest score in our rubric does not include no future involvement of the previous party that holds title to the land. The thing that's really key about this strand is the negotiation and the communication about it, and the willingness for the title holders to step back if it doesn't feel right for the new stewards, the future stewards, to continue to be in relationship with them and to really center the needs of the new stewards who are stepping in. All right, and our third strand is the current needs of the title holder or the seller. Does the offer directly state any stipulations about the land transition up front? And our highest score is that the title holder is very clear and upfront with any needs they have regarding the land transition at the beginning of conversations, well before escrow or advancing the transition process. This is kind of an example of laying the whole situation out on the table to begin with, and being clear about if there are institutions involved, who the actual current title holders are, who is able to negotiate or sign for the property and make decisions, things like that. And the lowest score we have for this is that the title holder doesn't know their needs, or their needs may shift erratically over time before, during, or after the land transition. And Cass, how would you rate the Christian church organization in terms of this strand?
Well, it was kind of in, different ways, because they knew their needs. They wanted to sell the camp for a high price. But there was, I feel like there was some erraticness to it, some like lack of clarity, because, and I think primarily the lack of coherence within their organization. Basically, what we learned was that if the two that were representing the church organization were to ask for too much from the rest of the body, then the whole deal would fall apart. And so that seemed to me that they didn't have their clarity was kind of brittle in a way. It didn't have a lot of responsiveness to the actual situation.
Our next strand is honesty and transparency. Have all of the details regarding the health and function of the land and facility been investigated, documented, and shared? And our highest score is the land and facilities have been thoroughly inspected and assessed for the conditions of the structures and health of the ecosystems and wildlife present. This information and the history of the land is openly shared with the prospective title seekers. And the other end of the spectrum, on the low end for this, is that little to no effort has been made to understand the condition of the structures and health of the ecosystems and wildlife before engaging in a transition. The current title holders may come across as opaque and disinterested. Where would you score the CCO on this strand, Cass?
I think for everyone who got the story, they definitely scored the lowest that you can score on this rubric.
Strand 5, willingness to engage in a flexible process. Are the title holders willing to be flexible with the process of the ethical land transition to ensure that the needs of all parties are met? Our top score for this is that title holders are fully on board with allowing the details and process to emerge. They are graceful in understanding when things shift, and they embrace that their ability to support the title seekers as needs emerge is a significant aspect of being justice-oriented. I'll say that again, their ability to support title seekers as needs emerge is a significant aspect of a justice-oriented approach. Title holders understand that the conventional systems of real estate can be particularly difficult for marginalized folks and those without access to wealth to navigate. And the title holders seek to lessen the impact and damage the conventional system can cause, such as providing specific resources to the buyers as needed, such as legal support and more time for the transition process. This is a big one. And our lowest score on this strand is that title holders are rigid and adhere to conventional real estate, fully believing that their role is prescribed by the rules of real estate. As the needs of the title seeking group emerge, the title holders stand firmly that any challenges or hurdles the title seekers face isn't their concern or business. Title holders' approach to the length of time of the process is rigid and inflexible. How would you rate the CCO on this strand?
They definitely got the lowest score on this strand as well. They were very, very rigid and inflexible.
Right, strand 6, land back and reparations. To what extent does the land transition involve direct gift, discount, and/or funding for legal services? Our top score, the land transition will bequest the land outright to BIPOC folks. Title holders may even develop creative ways to pay for legal fees, property taxes, etc., to prioritize future stewardship of the land and lessen the impact of colonialism. And on the bottom end of this one, we have the land transition prioritizes profit and the land is sold to the highest bidder in the competitive market, which may be well above the appraised value of the property. Can you score this one for us, please?
We're still at the bottom of the rubric here.
Okay. And finally, our last strand, 7. It's a beefy rubric, let me tell you. The land as entity. Do the current title holders regard the land as sacred and sovereign? How do they value those who currently or have historically tended the land? Our top score, title holders have a high-touch relationship with the land and involve those who have historically tended the land and who are active stewards in their decision-making process. And those active stewards might not be owners of the land, but they're still being involved in the decision-making process. The story of the land itself, past, present, and future for generations to come, is central. Land transfer to those who are original peoples and or others who have a multi-generational stewardship ethic has value to them more than money can measure. So this is really centering the land as its own entity and really trying to make sure that the people coming in to care for the land have that multi-generational stewardship ethic. And at the bottom of this rubric strand is that title holders see land as an asset and a liability. Decision makers know very little about the land care except as an expense. Decisions about the land are made solely through the lens of financial and legal considerations. And what do you think about this one, Cass?
Well, we know that they're down at the bottom of the rubric on this one as well. And I do want to, though, put in just to let those who watch this and are here with us now know that when it doesn't, when the land as an entity is held more as central, and that we have been able to support many land transitions where that is that ethic is held very high, and it is as you can imagine, a very beautiful and healing process.
So that was a lot of information, And for those of you who did print out this worksheet that is the rubric, it will likely be simpler for you in moving forward to our breakout rooms because that information is right in front of you and there's a lot there. But we are going to move to breakout rooms. And our reflection questions are, which parts of the rubric do you think your community have the easiest time being on the high end? And which strands feel like they're the most challenging? Now we're going to do a similar thing like we did before, where I'm going to drop in an image of the questions for the second breakout room, which involves those questions there and also has a list of the 7 different strands. So hold on one sec. So please navigate to the chat box on the side of your presentation screen and click to open the breakout room 2 questions. And I think I actually need to shorten us to about 18 minutes this time, but this is a pretty, it's a lot of content and there's a lot to potentially reflect on. So if you're able to get those questions, that question and the different rubric strands to pop up, can you please give me a thumbs up? Can I see you in the, if you're on video? I see a few thumbs. Awesome, thank you. You know, and given that it looks like there are fewer of us right now, and because the last time I know some of the breakout rooms had less people in it, think I'm going to bring our time down to 15 minutes for this, anticipating that we're going to have 3 or 4 people in each room. I think that should be enough time for some reflections and for some checking in about the rubric. And then when we all come back, we'll have time to share things to the whole group again.
So if everyone has that rubric up, I kept most of the groups together, but combined some so that we make sure we have 3 to 4. And then all of the presenters we're in a room together don't need to say yes to it, but just to make things simpler. So I'm opening all the rooms, and go ahead when you're ready.
Great. And we'll send another reminder when the session is just a few minutes from being done.
Oh, and then this one. Interesting. All right. Welcome back.
All right, did we all make it back? It looks like we did. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a chance to have some interesting and generative conversations about our rubric. And right now, we do have a chunk of time to share out any of the responses people have. Our question, of course, was, which parts of the rubric do you think are easier, potentially easier for your community to be on the higher end, and which strands feel like they're the most challenging? And we definitely acknowledge this is a lot of information, but this is a part of deepening into some of the very specific practical tools that the Center for Ethical Land Transition is trying to create and bring to people who are engaging in ethical land transitions. And so that question of where you kind of sit on each of the questions brought up in the rubric is a big deal for you and your community to be reflecting on. So is there anyone who wants to, with either the raise hand feature or by putting a hand up on their screen, to share some of what you touched in about in your breakout room? I see Saskia's hand. Did I say your name correctly?
Yes. So I just have a question. For me, when I was going through this, I was just like, with my area and doing reparations, it's like people don't think of reparations and in regards to Black Americans that are descendants of chattel slavery in the US. They're not thinking about sovereignty for us. Like, we are perpetually, we've had loss of sovereignty. We're still property of the government, loss of sovereignty, land and body. We're indigenous here to Turtle Island, as well as on the continent of Africa. That we have faced multiple genocides over several centuries, amounting to a Holocaust. Like, none of this is like really thought about for us. And I'm really thankful for this, but honestly, it's like, oh my, like, I'm dealing with an audience that doesn't get any of this. Like, Rubik's strands, like 1 through 7, it's like nil, I feel like, in my advocacy. And really, I guess what I'm asking for is, how do you find people that like have this cultural competency even to begin with? Because no, they do not look at the land in regards to as being sacred and sovereign. These are transactional a-holes. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are capitalists. I'm surrounded by capitalists in this movement, and it's extremely depressing and overwhelming and saddening and maddening, and not really thinking about like the harm that occurs when you've been having land violently ripped away from you over and over again, the constant displacement. Your neighborhood doesn't even look like your neighborhood anymore. We're calling people immigrants instead of new settlers. It's like, even down to the terminology, it's like maddening. And then the classification of people by color when everybody's screaming they're anti-racist. It's like, I really need advice, you guys, like, on how do you even get to that point? Because I'm looking at cultural competency. I'm like, no,
they're struggling in all areas. They're struggling in all areas. And where do you go from there? I'm in Boston, by the way, so it's just, maybe it's Massachusetts.
I feel the energy in what you're saying and the truth of it. And so I just thank you for bringing it. And it's intense out there. And I sometimes am the go-between. I'm the middle-aged white woman sent into racist territory on behalf of and in solidarity with Black folks and other cultural groups. And it's not, there's, like, how do you find people is like, I'm heartened by the nuns and nuns being willing to just show up and keep doing the work to educate and like create a field where there's more education, connection, awareness, possibility. But I don't know, Saskia, I'd be down to talk with you outside of this like with more space to really get into your particular work in the world and your situation and how we could learn with each other to address what you're talking about. Because there's no, I don't want to disrespect you in the depth and rightness of your statements and your questions with any sort of attempt at a simple answer, because we know that it is rough out there.
Thank you.
I think something I feel called to add in response, Saskia, is just trying to witness the phenomenon of what the growth of consciousness actually looks like, and that there are some steps that it has to be action and it has to be evolution and growth of consciousness. And hopefully our actions will promote more growth of consciousness and more understanding, and that will promote more actions. And yeah, I don't know, I noticed that there's a starting in that, and how do we appeal to each other's consciousness and try to expand that. One thing CELT does is just you mentioning the definitions and the language in the system inherent in the oppressive structures and how the language of it is such a big piece of that. We work on trying to bring a new language to reframe so that there are new words and new vocabularies to talk about things. And we hope that by talking about it, we create traction. But with that said, it is everything everywhere from every direction all at once. And as I deepen into the work of land justice, you notice how it is everywhere, and the need to address change and have a different approach is absolutely everywhere. And it is a lot. Abby, please join our conversation.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. My name is Abby Huff, and I'm part of CELT. And I do want to just really honor and rise up what you just said, Saskia, because there is a big difference between and consciousness around the land back movement and reparations. There's a very big difference, and I hold very similar sentiments as you and have been doing my best to engage in really challenging conversations. And I think for me, one of the biggest things is to really hold on to my allyship and relationships to Native and Indigenous communities, and continue to model the equality and equity that I hope to see in our world. And, in that way, I've really continued to magnetize towards people who have that same sentiment and take away the isolation and the feelings of isolation in that process. So I just wanted to name that, and we definitely see you, and yeah, sending you love.
Let's go over to Jean.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in on this point. then like the added layer of like building bridges, because it feels like there is so much at stake. And so like holding all of these ideas that we know to be true and right. And then I guess like the stress that comes from feeling like if you don't communicate clearly that these people who hold the land maybe will choose not to work with you, and then you'll like lose the land. So it just feels stressful and hard, that, as I'm also seeing so often, the people that are holding the land don't have this level of cultural competency.
Totally. and there aren't a lot of transition facilitators that can help bridge in the translation. And so that is also, I mean, the Center for Ethical Land Transition is just getting going to help provide movement infrastructure here, because that's a really big piece, is that sense of power. And then you have to like do the right thing in order to actually access land. And it's a very it's a rough reality at the moment. And so hopefully we can train more facilitators to actually help with the translation and the support for what needs to be learned by the title holders in these domains of cultural competency.
Let's go to Sarah. Oh, Sarah, you're on mute.
My bad, sorry. Just to kind of share a little bit of what we're learning about this in response to your question or your experience that you named, Saskia. I think things that we're learning right now with the side of the work, the piece of the work that we're doing, the lane that we're in, is that part of this is skill building, and part of this is community formation, supporting people and not feeling isolated in the learning process, and not isolated or shameful in the learning process. Like white supremacy and capitalism have shaped all of us, and all of us in different ways and impact us in different ways, but like actually naming that and creating spaces where people can do the work of healing that they need to do in order to show up well is like, that is a whole lane of work, and doing the political education around that and doing the technical support around that. I mean, I'm so grateful for, CELT in terms of like building the facilitation capacity for practitioners to kind of be the buffer, but it's also like, it is skill building, it is healing, and it is community formation. And I'll say part of our hunch is also, it's the risk of relationship. So there's no getting around that, I don't think. And that's something that we've had to come to accept in our work, is like, this is going to be messy and there's a risk that comes with relationship. And so being really clear about that so that people can say yes or no is really important.
Maureen, let's go to you.
I think the religious community that I'm with comes from a sort of a different angle. We've been studying reparations community-wide. We are doing all kinds of educating ourselves. We are attending some land justice meetings. We're now part of a focus group, and we have some land, 800 acres of rural land in rural Kentucky with hardly any people of color nearby. And it's sort of like, who are the relationships that we have to start dialoguing with is in some ways the challenge. And it's also, I can't speak out of turn because I'm not in leadership. And I'm looking forward to the meeting we're having in June to really get some bottom line things, out, and, where do we start practically besides finding Black farmers in the area and helping to sell their goods, and our Farm and Land Committee having lots of research, opening our retreat centers to people who have been harmed by violence, you know, in nearby cities. And where's the diversification of what is a now aging and white, almost entirely white and Hispanic in origins community? And so it's like, I think we're plowing some ground that's going to be ready for something when we know what the something is. And it's not like those relationships are, you don't want to be trite about them. You want them to be real. And the other thing that Jeannie, well, I shouldn't say what somebody else mentioned in our small group is like, you know, with Illinois rural white farmers, this is in Kentucky, but rural white farmers, like, is it a place people feel welcome? Is it a place that's hospitable? Is it a place, you know, don't ask every question, make sure it's really something that's going to be supported. So I'm just blithering in the sense of where we are on all 6 of these things. Well, we ain't got started, you know, I mean, except we're pretty clear about our values, I think, you know, but how do they apply then? Or, you know, how willing are we to risk someone of the better kinds of possibilities of how you do things besides fair market value and all that stuff, you know? I'm gonna just stop talking because that's not, it's just saying, I hear what you're saying, Shaska, and Boston's pretty far away, but I hear what you're saying. And I think that what Nuns and Nuns is doing in terms of stirring up the ground, plowing the ground, getting ready for whatever places people on this screen or elsewhere are, they're doing remarkable work about getting us clearer about what it means.
Thank you, Maureen. And, you know, I feel like something that I really just kind of pull out of listening to you share, and the depth and complexity of trying to explain like the specific land that you're talking about, is I feel like all of the tools that we're kind of suggesting today are all forms of organizing. They're all forms of coming together as a community and having that reflection and trying to come up with actual action steps for what you are going to do to turn the ideas of restorative justice, of land justice, into something that's actually real. And it is work. And it is work that we really hope that people who are in the title holding position and people who are part of you know, religious organizations that hold really valuable ethics, there's really a hope that those ethics will get applied to this moment. And it is work. It is work to organize. It's work to sit in a room with even your peers and disagree, let alone with people who you might not identify as peers, or who you may have some connection to, but don't have a deep personal relationship with because they're outside of your immediate social circle. And so it is all work by all means. And it's a big ask for yourself and your peers and community to step out of the comforts that you're in and to begin that process of organizing, because we know that it's much easier to go into the conventional market trying to get rid of land. It's so much easier, and the country is still built on capitalism. It's still built on wealth and access to wealth, and there are innumerable things that the people who might have access to the wealth that is allegedly inherent in that land might do with that wealth. And shifting the perspective to imagine the land as an entity is a huge deal, and imagine the concept of people actually tending that land and caring for that land and being in sacred relationship. So it's not a simple thing, not a simple thing at all. But thank you for your reflections. I would love to go over to Robert.
I like the inclusion of land as entity. I think that's a really important concept. And we have a number of sisters here today who have been connected to the land for some time. And I bet that many of them oftentimes went on the various parts and paths of their land and found deep spiritual experience and connection with the land. And the question for me is, how do we train people to fall in love with the land? Because if we fall in love with the land, we're going to be able to fight for the land. We do not have that much time. We have a decade where severe climate change is going to take place. I live in Florida, which is one of the high-risk places that could conceivably, within our lifetime, see, maybe not my lifetime, but next generation's lifetime, we'll see all the glaciers in Greenland melted, and there'll be 5 to 6 feet sea level rise. I have a friend who's an engineer working with buildings down in Fort Lauderdale on how to raise them because of sea surge. But that's only one problem. But the question of falling in love with land and fighting for the land is really important, because we made land into a commodity, a capital, when land is a person, a subjectivity. The earth is a subjectivity. If we begin to understand, because what our indigenous brothers remind us of is that there is a connection in life, animacy to life itself, and we need to recover it. What I did as a college professor was I instructed my students to go out and adopt a tree and spend a couple of weeks learning about the tree, and to come back and tell me about the tree. Really important to develop a relationship, a conversational relationship with the tree itself. We've got to change people's views around nature in order to change the views about land. So I jump into there as a foundation base that maybe we need to start training young people who have a real desire to deal with climate change on how to become advocates for the land and the environment. My social justice perspective.
Thank you, Robert. You know, the thing about young people, I have to reflect, I was just at the Bioneers Conference with the Center for Ethical Land Transition, and which is a very compelling conference that happens in the Bay Area on land justice and environmental justice and social justice. And one Indigenous elder who spoke there, she mentioned the significance of how important it has been for her local tribal community to have land that their tribe is tending together, that their children and grandchildren get to be at, and the incredible sense of groundedness and rootedness that the kids feel and experience because of that tether to land. So I definitely hear what you're saying about teaching the kids, and I think that there's still an enormous problem of access to that type of living with land. And addressing that access through reparations and through specific direct action that people who are title holders can do is an enormous way to try to create that future where kids are raised knowing and caring for land. So right now, I noticed that we just have 5 minutes left, which is not very much time. And I want to see if there's any additional sort of final things to share before we transition to our closing. And something that Sarah just added in the chat is that in her opinion that youth leaders have a lot of wisdom on land. They don't have the power and aren't the ones making the decisions. And that's very, very true. I mean, if you want an insightful opinion about what could happen in the future, go to the closest young person, and they probably have some incredible ideas. Are they being empowered to be able to like apply those ideas? Not very often, because the system keeps chugging along. But yeah. All right, well, before we do our full closing, I am gonna pull us back to a slide and just invite people to do a little bit of reflection right now on what it is you're coming away from our presentation with, any specific points or reflections that you're taking away from the training. And also, before you transition to the rest of your day and whatever else you might be doing, see if you can write down just a brief, short list of what your next steps are. for your organization, for yourself, in terms of trying to bring action to the ideas behind some of these ethics, some of these visions for land justice, for ethical land transitions. All right. Well, I want to say thank you everyone for being here. It was a pleasure and a privilege to be here, and looking forward to more conversations and seeing more of you in the future. And just going to hand over to Cass and then to Sarah to do any closing.
Well, I know we're really close to the end here, and Sarah's got some important information for you, but I really do want to thank you all so much for staying with us this full time. Oh my gosh, a 3-hour Zoom training. Thank you for holding it down. And it's big, thick, important stuff. It's really good to be in it with you. Thank you to everyone who shared. Thank you so much for sharing your learnings, and just really honored to be in it with you.
Echo, echo, echo. Thank you all again. I will say, if you wrote down some next steps, if you're committed to this journey, if you've been already on this journey, I just want to reiterate that the movements for land justice are going to require all of us. They're going to require everyone, and like you are a part of it. I want to just like affirm that we're a part of a growing movement. And so like 3-hour trainings are a lot to ask. So thank you. And like investment of our energy and time in these movements is so necessary if we're going to live into the future that we need and deserve. So thank you so much for being here. Your effort and commitment is seen and recognized. And thank you for all that you've shared. You can find more opportunities for learning, for connection, for the technical aspects, the more emotional aspects, case studies of land return, examples of incredible Black and Indigenous and other people of color led stewardship. And so if you want to take a look at that link, there's recordings, there's future offerings. We know this is going to be a continued formation. It's not one moment, but many moments on the journey. So thank you for being with us. And with that, maybe if everyone wants to just come off mute and say goodbye, and thank our wonderful presenters. Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Neha, who's not here. Just really grateful for your expertise. Thank you.